And I'll just start right here. When Jesus came, Jesus changed everything. Jesus is the pivotal turning point in the Word. He's the pivotal turning point in human history. God starts with a man, puts him in a garden. Man eats from a tree. Man is forbidden from that point on to eat from another tree. God escorts him out of the garden, protects that tree of life with a sword. Man goes through his journey, God always hunting him down with goodness and mercy and favor. God wraps himself up in an earth suit, comes to the planet in a man named Jesus, all so that he can take man back into the garden to eat from the tree he's never been able to eat from before. So man had ruined it by eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and had chased doing the right thing and avoiding the wrong thing for his entire existence. And that had caused him to create a religion in his own heart, his own mind. He's distanced in his own mind from God. He covers himself with fig leaves, and that fig leaves turns into covering himself with religion. And covering himself with religion comes with covering himself with self-righteousness. See how the cycle perpetuates? Keeps going and going and going until Jesus comes and dies for us and raises again. Jesus comes really to effectively remove the first tree. He comes to take that axe. As John the Baptist would say to the Pharisees, the axe has been laid to the root of the tree. That Jesus actually came to lay the axe to the root of the original tree so that you could be escorted back into a new tree. A sword is plunged into Jesus at Calvary. Remember what Jesus said on his way to the cross when he said to the disciples, the sword's going to smite the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. When that sword woke up, the sword that had been guarding the way to the tree of life for millennium, it wakes up at Calvary and it plunges into Jesus. And Jesus makes the way available to everyone to come back into the garden and eat from the tree of life and have the life of God back in them. He's the transition point. He's the changing point. Nothing's the same once Jesus arrives on the scene. The author of the book of Hebrews is trying to walk a Jewish audience all the way up to the superiority of Jesus. And to do that, he has to show how Jesus is better than angels. Jesus is better than Moses. Jesus is better than Aaron. Jesus is better than Jerusalem. Jesus is better than the temple. Jesus is better than sacrificial lambs and bulls and turtle doves and pigeons. You got this superior Jesus. He even uses their own heroes in what we call the Hall of Faith in that 11th chapter of Hebrews, where he mentions Enoch and Abel, and he mentions Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses and all of these heroes of the faith. And then that great transition happens in Hebrews chapter 12. And Hebrews 12 is one of my favorite passages in the Bible. And it's one of the most frightening passages for a lot of grace people, because I don't know if you remember Hebrews 12, but Hebrews 12 is that chapter that some people try to use against you when you say God's not mad. And they'll come to you and go, yeah, but Hebrews 12 says he chastens everyone that he loves. If you don't get chastened, you're a bastard. If you want to be one of his sons, you're going to have to be disciplined. And they always equate that to mean that God's obviously ticked off, because the only way you could ever undergo discipline is if someone's mad at you. At least that's the idea that people have when they arrive at Hebrews chapter 12. Well, I'm here to tell you tonight that that idea is completely false because of what this story stands to represent. Hebrews chapter 12. Look at verse number 1 as we begin. Therefore we also are surrounded by so great cloud of witnesses. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin that does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. I want you to take a look at this verse, because most of us get lost in Hebrews 12:1 trying to define the great cloud of witnesses. I've heard arguments over whether or not these are your dead relatives peering over the balcony of heaven, watching your life. Then we get stuck on every weight and every sin. And we get into arguments over singular sin versus plural sin. Sin as a noun versus sin as a verb. And we get into all these theological wranglings over the definition of this verse. And we miss what the author's actually trying to do, which is set up a metaphor. And the metaphor is at the very last part of the verse. Let's run with patience the race that is set before us. And if you will catch this in verse 1, it will help you for the remainder of the chapter, because the author of the book of Hebrews grabs a metaphor and stays with it. I don't believe that the Apostle Paul wrote the book of Hebrews. I've got 3 or 4 good reasons why I believe that. They are not necessarily right, but they're mine. I don't believe that it's Paul. Paul is not near as laser focused as the author of the book of Hebrews. Paul likes to mix his metaphors. I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. Paul likes to mix boxing and racing in the same story. The author of the book of Hebrews is a little more pinpoint. He's a little more accurate. If he starts a racing metaphor, he may deviate off into training, he may deviate off into discipline, but he's going to come back to that racing metaphor.